Welcome to Happy Path Programming. I'm Bruce Eckel.
I'm James Ward.
Welcome to Happy Path.
The actual last one of 2023.
The actual last one, yeah. We decided we would add one because you'll understand why.
Because it's Christmas.
Well,
and we have a Christmas present to unwrap for you all.
We do. We do. Several. Actually,
Yes,
I'd say
several.
more than one.
Yeah.
Yes, everything seems on track for the Winter Tech Forum, February 26th through March 1st. Actually, those are the official days. It looks like if you come early, you can go with us on a little cross-country ski out to brunch at this yurt.
Yurt in the woods.
The yurt in the woods, which is just lovely. And we've done dinners there in the past, but I think we'll switch to this. So think about coming early, coming the Saturday night before that, and then you can come and do that. And then also the Saturday afterwards, we everybody brings their extra food and in the morning, and we make this big breakfast together, and it's a pretty fun experience. And then people will head off usually from there.
Yeah. So this is the last week in February.
Last week in February,
Colorado.
Yes. And the website is wintertechforum.com, and it still has the old dates on it, and I need to update it with some things. So I will get to that soon, I hope.
Yeah. And as part of that, when people register or whatever, they then can get access to the Slack channel where they can communicate with people about shared lodging and
That's right.
transportation and all this kind of stuff.
And there's some new places that I think should be available then that are just down the street from me, and they're I think anyway, I'm going to put that on the website too, how to get those.
Some rental houses.
Those, yeah, it's the ones that are right across from where the hardware store is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the ones that they've been working on, and they look gorgeous.
Huh.
And they're designed to be short-term rentals.
Oh, cool.
And I just need to go talk to them and find out, what URLs to send you to, because I think that would be probably a really pleasant experience. But people also rent houses, and other things. Part of the I think part of the real nice aspect of the conference is if you can get into a rental house with a group of other people, because then the whole experience is kind of nonstop.
Yeah,
we do all kinds of stuff. We go out to breakfast or have, just things happen all the time.
Yeah.
So you're never really bored. And if you want to talk about technology, there's way more opportunities than just during the conference proper. And we always have a super good time. And I feel like everybody who comes here is always kind of amazed at what a good time that they have. And so yes.
Great.
We'll do that.
Yeah. Christmas present number one.
Right.
Is
the
T-shirts.
T-shirt.
So
yes.
Tell us about that.
We had our designer, my friend who I've known since we were 10. Anyway, he does wonderful designs, and he
created our logo.
He created our logo, and he incorporated that into the shirt. But then the shirt has a kind of a themed AI generated image that's printed all over the shirt. So it's very different from a lot of the shirts you see, and both of us think it's gorgeous. So and this isn't quote unquote merch. This is just we don't make money off of this or anything. No. We just created it because, well, like we do everything for this podcast, because
just for fun.
It's fun.
Yeah.
And so
so this is the Christmas present that people can go to a store and buy.
Yes. Online store.
Online store.
Yes. It's not in Target yet.
Not yet. And we'll put the link to that store, online store, in the description.
Yes. So and you can see the shirt and decide whether you like that. But we like them. So we're pretty pleased with them, and we may have him do other designs later. Yeah. And on other things as well. Coffee mugs, refrigerator magnets. There's lots of possibilities. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so on to Christmas present number 2.
Yes.
So we thought it'd be a fun time to talk about a project that I've been working a lot on for a while, and
On and off.
on and off, yeah.
Hmm.
And you've been part of a lot of its development in various ways,
Mostly in
and
the idea form.
yeah,
Yes. Well, because I think, I'm not sure if we talked about it before I had written that blog post on the problem with Gradle,
yes,
or
yeah,
should have been plurals. Yeah.
the problems,
The
yeah.
problems with Gradle. And,
Yeah,
well,
and that was a number of years ago that you wrote that blog
uh,
post about the
I'm
problems with
losing
Gradle.
track of how
Yeah.
long ago things are. So I believe you. It might.
So we, for a long time, anybody that's used Gradle has probably felt some friction in various ways, whether they're experienced build engineers or developers who don't want to think about the build.
I'm gonna move you from friction to rage, because I feel like I got a lot of people responding to that article going, "Oh my gosh, I'm glad somebody said this because I found it so frustrating." And, well, and the fact that you're trying to do something with, Java or Kotlin or whatever, and then you have to stop because you want to build it, and then do this entirely different thing, which sort of looks like Java but isn't, and sort of, oh, I don't know. I'm just so over it. I just basically, that's one of the reasons I feel like some people give up the JVM in general, is because they're just going, it's too.
It's definitely something I've heard from many people, is that one of their reluctances to using Kotlin is working with Gradle.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you can use Kotlin with other build tools, but
It's
if
not
you're in the world
optimized for
of
that.
Android, like
Mm-hmm.
Gradle's kind of the default.
Yeah.
There are people that use Maven and Bazel and others, um, but yeah, I think Gradle is a big part of the Kotlin ecosystem and a big part of the Java ecosystem. Uh,
And we just put up with it because that's what it was. And then Rust comes along, and it's got cargo. And now everybody goes, oh, that's what I've wanted all along. And so in Python, now there's Rye, which is modeled after cargo. And I've heard other people
yeah,
doing it because they go, oh, yeah, I don't want to think about that. I want the device, I want the thing to do it for me.
yeah,
And so that was, I think, a pretty strong inspiration for
yeah.
this.
Well, and remember we had Josh Surratt on. We talked about build tools a
Yes.
couple of years ago, and um, Josh is an amazing expert on build tools. He maintained the Scala build tool SBT for a long time, and one of the things that came out in that episode, which I thought was really interesting about build tools, was that I don't think that anyone has created, after creating a successful build tool, no one has ever gone on to create another build tool. And so there's this weird thing where these people become like experts in what a build tool needs to do, all the different pieces of it. It's a very complex problem. They get deep into it. They build a successful build tool that's used by a lot of people, and then they're like, I'm never fucking doing that again.
Because it's such a pain. And yet they're the ones that, if they did another from
Exactly.
scratch,
They would
they would
build,
do a much
and
better job.
this is the reason why all build tools suck, is
Mm-hmm.
because no one that has the knowledge to create the good build tool actually wants to
Ever
do
wants
it.
to do it again. Yeah. Yeah.
And so what the project that we've been working on, is an attempt to not create a new build tool. That is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely not what I want to do. The motivation for it was more like Spring Boot is to Spring. So there's Spring Framework. It's this core framework used by millions of Java developers, and it's existed for a very long time. But a number of years ago, there was the Spring Boot project that took the experience of Spring and kind of wrapped it up into this nice little package and made it easy to boot into that world of
Well,
Spring and
kind of
just
like
get a
Ruby
bunch
on
of
Rails in that
defaults.
case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like how do you just have a good out of the box experience that, for many developers working with build tools, you don't want to have to think about all these different things that the build tool needs. You just want to say, here's my code, give me what I want. And
Well, and especially if you're having to learn another language. And I think at this point, if it's going to be another language, I'd rather it be very different and not sort of similar. Like, I was okay with make files. I mean, they have lots of limitations and everything, but I knew the scope of it and I could make stuff work. Whereas I never felt that way about Gradle.
yeah. Yeah. I will point out it did get better with the Gradle Kotlin scripting support, because
Sure.
then at least like the language was
Sort of
familiar
readable.
and
Yeah.
sensible, and there
Yeah.
was good code hinting. Anyways,
Hmm.
but we'll deviate from that. Maybe come back to that later. So the idea for the project was, can we create something like Spring Boot
Hmm.
is to Spring Framework for Gradle? So it was called Gradle Boot, but I renamed it to Graboo.
Hmm.
I don't know, trademark issues or something. I thought, didn't want to just assume that I could use the name Gradle. So it is
Mm.
Gradle Boot. It's the tool to boot easily into Gradle, and it. I think it's reached a point where I'm now ready to say, I don't. You shouldn't use this for production, but there's some experiments in Gradle Boot that I think that we can develop as a community and turn into something that actually could be extremely useful for people using Gradle.
Well, even if you don't use it for production, ultimately it gets you started. I mean, the core of it, and if you build on that, then you might end up with something that you want to use with production. But the getting started part has always been, it's like, okay, I have to remember, how is this? What are these things I have to do? And I got to say, in Python, you have the pyproject.toml files. Big fan of that because you can put everything in the toml file. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
multiple. But it's like, oh, we need this thing. Whereas with Gradle, you got to put a bunch of stuff around it, and you have to
It's
remember what that stuff is, and on and on and
That
on.
was one of the core insights that took me actually years to come up with. But I finally realized, oh, one of the challenges with Gradle is that Gradle wants you to express your build in terms of what Gradle needs, not in terms of what you as the developer need. And
It's not serving us; it's serving the developers of Gradle or whatever.
and if you're a build engineer and you want to have very precise control over what the build tool is doing and when it's doing it and how it's doing it, that capability is really important and gives you so much flexibility.
But it's surfaced to
It's
everybody.
surface to
And
everybody.
I don't want to be a build engineer, and I think most people don't.
Yeah.
It's like a very specialized thing. And so it should be something where, oh, here's, yeah, for everything that you do 95, 98% of the time, it's just really simple and straightforward. If you're a build engineer, there's a door you can open and go in and do all that stuff, but it isn't exposed to everybody.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that is the problem with Gradle, is it's exposed to everybody.
Yeah.
And everybody has to
One
know
of
it.
the problems, and
Well, yeah,
and
one of.
we'll there's a bunch of different pieces of Graboo, and we'll go through them. But I think we should, because we're on this subject, let's
Mm-hmm.
talk about this piece of it, because this was one of the core driving things that I was trying to solve with Graboo was how do we make it so the build is expressed in terms of what the developer wants, not in terms of what the build tool needs.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another attempt at doing something like this from JetBrains called Amper, which is great, and definitely there's some interesting stuff happening there. But the idea is, how do you define a model that ultimately will become what the build tool needs, but is defined in terms of what the developer wants? And so there's a few different aspects to this. One aspect is this idea of using a declarative language for that. The Amper tool has been experimenting with using YAML as their declarative language to define the build.
Remind me whether you like YAML or not. I have the feeling that there was. I can remember some emotions about YAML
There's
from the.
some emotions about
Yes.
YAML.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of YAML at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's a terrible, terrible language.
So
I
it's
mean, it's like on the level of JavaScript terrible. Just way too many things way too many foot guns, I think, is the hidden foot guns.
I think this
One
is
of the
why
the
it
issues.
feels like people are moving more towards TOML because it's so much more straightforward.
Yeah, well, and Cargo uses TOML.
Yes, Cargo uses it, Rye uses it.
Yeah,
Well, no, Python uses it.
yeah.
Python's moved to it.
Yeah, so I mean, JetBrains has said about Amper that the YAML thing is potentially temporary.
Yeah.
That
Okay,
they
so
could
they
use
might.
TOML or
Okay.
something else. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But for Gradle Boot, one of the things that I wanted to do was I didn't want to create a declarative language or use some declarative format, but I did want my builds to be able to be expressed in a declarative way. And the primary driver for that is to be able to provide two-way tooling.
Mm.
So the two-way tooling for it is whether it's in the IDE, whether it's in a web interface, whether it's from a command line, you may want to be able to manipulate your build. And to do that, it is much easier if you have a declarative format to do the parsing and understand the structure and what's possible and where to put things.
And it's not too bad for me. If I mean, it's like my experience with Chat GPT. In fact, I even had it once create a little Kotlin program and the Gradle build file to go along with it, and it seemed like it did a good job.
Yeah.
But and when you say here's what I want, and it shows it to you, and you can study it and understand it, and or modify it, and it's like, but when I have to start from scratch and remember, oh yeah, how do we, I mean, I didn't even know why do we choose one repository or another, and I think in Graboo you put all three of them in there, is that right?
It's that's something I actually want to fix. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
temporary thing,
Okay.
but just as an so I think it's a good example. In a typical Gradle build, you have to define explicitly your repositories. One of the core motivations of Graboo is the things that 80% of people are going to do, you shouldn't have to define. And so what I'm really trying to do is make it so that you don't have to define your repositories. You get default repositories, and sure, if you don't want those repositories, you can remove them somehow. I
Or
don't know if I
change
figured.
them, but you have a thing that you can look at and go, oh, here's the repository, I'll use this other one instead, rather than going, how do you do repositories again, and why, how do I choose which one? I
Yeah,
don't know. I
yeah,
don't know any of those things.
yeah. Yeah, and so what I built Graboo on was the Gradle Kotlin scripting DSL for Gradle,
Mm-hmm.
but I created a very small subset of what's possible in all of Gradle, and I defined it in terms of that model in terms of what the developer is actually trying to do. So if you want a Kotlin app, at the beginning of your build file, you say boot.kotlin app, and then I think that the only thing you need to specify is which platform you want to target.
Mm-hmm.
So you can put in the JVM or native or Android, whatever. So you can add in your platforms. But it's this very concise definition. You can put your dependencies in there, but it's still built on the Kotlin script. It just
So
is a
just a
constrained kind of
clarification
DSL.
there. So the Gradle Kotlin DSL works with Java too, right?
It's just the way that you define your build. So
Okay.
you
Yeah.
write your build in Kotlin,
Mm-hmm.
and so in Gradle boot you write your build in Kotlin, but it's a very constrained subset of what you can do in normal Gradle. So I've created these model data classes essentially that only allow you to do a few things.
Mm-hmm.
And right now it does very little, but as we discover, oh, like most users actually need this thing, then we can expand the model. I think the hard thing will be to determine like where's the line. I think that's probably the challenge with a lot of these things is like how far do you push things. And so what I'm kind of aiming for is 80%, like 80% of uses should be covered by this concise declarative format. And then if you need more power, great, you can go off into full on Gradle land and do whatever you want.
But again, you have this starting point to work with. You go, oh, I probably will add a new library here or tooling here if I need it. And eventually, I assume there's going to be Graboo add like there is in Cargo and Rye and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the features I've not done yet, but
Mm-hmm.
is I think next on my list of
Mm-hmm.
things to tackle is the two-way tooling around adding dependencies,
Mm-hmm.
um, which I think will be pretty fun and easy. I'm aiming for if you've ever gone to start.spring.io to create a new Spring app, you can add dependencies right on that web page.
Right.
So you should be able to add these dependencies either from your project starter, whether that's in the web interface
Or the command line.
or the command line.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that I'm exploring.
And one of the other things that I think you're doing is you're making this, and as someone who has taught a lot of workshops, JVM based workshops, um, like you always spend the first exercise dealing
Setting
with
up the environment.
class path and everything like that, and downloading and configuring and all that. And Gradle boot is going to provision all that stuff for you without. I mean, you're creating an executable for, like, so if I'm on Windows, I download the Windows executable, I say go, and it gets and configures the JVM for me, right?
Yeah. So So we moving on from the feature of the, we'll call it developer oriented build definition or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. So that was one of the core features of Graboo was that build definition, that
Sure.
being developer oriented and being
Right.
able to support two-way tooling. So then going on to one of the other features was I I like Gradle Wrapper because
What's Gradle
Gradle
Wrapper?
Wrapper is something that many Gradle projects use, where you just run Gradle W and it downloads
Oh,
Gradle for
sure.
you and runs Gradle.
Right.
It's good. The missing piece of it, there's a couple missing pieces of it. One is that it does require the JVM to run Gradle Wrapper,
Mm-hmm.
and you could assume that most people have the JVM, but they may not have the right version of the JVM. There's definitely some challenges there, and so you need the JVM to run Gradle and to bootstrap into Gradle.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I wanted to experiment with is, can I actually have a native wrapper? I call it the bootstrapper, the
Mm-hmm.
Graboo bootstrapper, that will set up your environment for what's needed. And so what it does is it's this kind of a bit of a Rube Goldberg machine for various reasons, but the first entry point into it is a shell script or a command script, and so you can put those in your Git repository, and so then anyone can clone your repo and run Graboo. But what those do is those go and fetch a native application, Graboo. And so the native application Graboo I built with Kotlin Native. It's like 4 megs or something like that. So it's pretty. And I didn't even UPX it. UPX is a compressor for binaries, so I think I did originally get it down to 700K compressed, but I didn't feel like
It's
700K 4 megs doesn't really matter.
not really.
So it downloads this native executable, and then the native executable for your OS, Windows, Mac, and Linux, it then downloads the JVM. And once it gets a JVM, then it can run the
But it
Gradle.
also installs and configures the JVM.
It doesn't have to really configure it.
Okay.
It really just puts it into a place on your file system, and then it's there.
You don't have to do a class path or anything.
No,
Okay.
because it's all managing. It's using it essentially under the covers.
Mm-hmm.
So then it runs the Gradle wrapper thing to install Gradle, and then once we get Gradle, then we can run any of our Gradle
Mm-hmm.
tasks, whatever, against our build.
Wow.
So it's this like multi-phase thing. But part of the reason why I did that like native wrapper piece, the native application piece, was that there's a few things that I actually did want to happen in native land, because they wouldn't require a JVM and would be fast. So, for example, if you do Graboo new to create a new project, that was something that I was like, I don't want to have to wait until there's a JVM. Yeah, eventually,
Mm-hmm.
like to actually do this build, we're going to need the JVM and we're going to need Gradle. But I did want that like Graboo new experience to just be instantaneous. And so you can Graboo new, that just is going through the native application.
But for new people and in teaching situations, I mean, this is going to be, yeah, I mean, this is going to be great.
Yeah, and then there's some other features to it that I'm still working on a bit because of fun with security on Mac and Windows.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to have this experience where you go to graboo.dev, which does work today. It's extremely ugly because I haven't put any time into
It's good
making it
enough.
look nice. But you go there, you create your new Graboo project, you tell it which kind of archetype you want to use, you get a zip file, you unzip your zip file, and then all that you should have to do is double click on your Graboo shell script or Graboo command, and that should then launch that project in your IDE.
Mm.
And I think it kind of works. On Mac, I'm having some issues with the gatekeeper that tries to keep you safe from malware, and so I got to maybe figure out how to do notarizing of my app or something. On Windows, it's like, hey, are you really sure you want to run this thing? And on Linux,
And there's
it
probably a
just works.
way to do some kind of validation in Windows as well. But
Yeah, I think I
if
can
you
sign it.
feel like
I think I
doing
can
it, sign it.
sign the
That's it. Yeah.
binary for Windows as well. But so the idea for that is like, yeah, many developers are familiar with opening up the command line, and you can go into the command line and you can say Graboo
But not
IDE,
all of them.
and Graboo IDE will open your project in the IDE, and so you can go that route as well. But it's like, hey, we can support an easier path for people, and for people that do want to just double click on this thing and have it open up in their IDE, like we can do that.
Pretty sweet.
Yeah, so there's that project, kind of the process of getting the build tool and its environment kind of set up and launched, and that's all there, and mostly working pretty well. There's probably a few issues and things. Turns out that doing cross-platform stuff, while Kotlin makes this a
Kotlin
whole
native.
lot, yeah, Kotlin native makes this a whole lot easier. There are weird things that come up. So, for instance, I discovered, this was maybe a couple days ago when I was working on this. There's a C function for chmodding a file, and it turns out that chmodding a file, you have to be on not just a POSIX system, but on a certain type of POSIX system.
Oh.
So Windows, I think, is technically like somewhat POSIX or something like that. Like there's some POSIX-y stuff available in Windows, but the Windows file system doesn't have file modes. And so chmod doesn't make sense on Windows. And I think in Kotlin native, when you compile the binary for Windows, you actually can't even call chmod because it just doesn't even make sense in the context of Windows. And so one of the nice things with Kotlin multi-platform is that I can say, okay, for Windows do this, for Mac do this, for Linux do this. So one of the fun things that I ran into around this was, first, that part was pretty easy. I'm just like, okay, on Linux and Mac, just chmod the file, because I needed it to be executable, and on Windows don't. But then it turns out there's another subtle difference in chmod between Linux and Mac. Chmod on a Mac takes like a ushort, and chmod on Linux takes a uint or something like that.
Bet you never thought you were going to be a C programmer.
Oh
again.
My God, the just fun of dealing with the differences in these C APIs across systems.
Those are just types. I thought you liked types.
I do like types.
Those are just raw.
Yeah. So there's been some fun kind of doing the whole multi-platform thing, and then testing for multi-platform is certainly challenging.
And how do you do that? Mostly through
GitHub Actions. Right. I run my CI stuff and tests on the 3 different platforms to verify it. But there's places where, it sure would be nice if I could run this test for Windows but on Linux. But it turns out that things like in the JVM file separator, path separator char, whatever it is, that gets given to you by your runtime, and so there's like no way that you can adequately like do a test that has like a Windows path separator. It's just like things get pretty wonky. So anyways, programming for multiple platforms is hard. Kotlin native definitely does a lot to make it easier,
but can't do everything.
I mean, it's not magic. It still is. There still is actual platforms with differences underneath the covers that you have to think about. So, so there is some fun challenges in kind of getting that native thing to work across all the different platforms.
Now, is some of that correctly because Kotlin native is still kind of early?
There may be. So one of the places that is challenging is that the library ecosystem around Kotlin native is pretty new and growing. So I need to be able to zip a file or unzip a file. I think I don't know if I do unzip. Maybe just zip. There isn't really at least that I've found, a unzip Kotlin native library. And so what I have to do is fork out to the native system and do my zip on the native system.
But do you even know if the native system has a zip?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think I do currently assume that the native system does have zip installed.
Just as a command line.
Yeah,
Okay.
which may not always be true.
Mm-hmm.
So it sure would be nice to just have a library that does this all in Kotlin native instead of having to fork
Sort of
out.
like Python has a zip library.
Yeah,
You don't have
yeah, exactly. And of course, this exists on the JVM, but
to.
at the point where I'm doing the zip, I'm
You don't
not
have a
in. I
JVM
don't
yet.
have a JVM, and
Mm-hmm.
so yeah. So there. It's a growing ecosystem. I did find one library that was going to give me my Linux targets for Kotlin multi-platform zipping, but they haven't been published yet. And
Oh.
so, as soon as I would love to replace that piece with a library,
Mm.
and maybe we're close to that. But yeah, it's I guess part of this project has been me kind of diving into some of these pieces of Kotlin multi-platform and Kotlin native, and trying to build some actual stuff there, which has been a good learning
Well,
experience.
and because part of your job now is supporting Kotlin and Kotlin multi-platform, and this is showing you like you can speak authoritatively about the fiddly bits
Yeah, yeah,
because you've struggled with them.
yeah.
And
Got to get deep into
mm-hmm.
it to really understand and figure out how I can try to make things better. So.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so that was the kind of native bootstrapper piece of Graboo. There's a couple other pieces. So one I mentioned Graboo.dev, the initializer. There's also the Graboo new. So if you do want to bootstrap
New
new
project.
projects, then you can just say Graboo new and create a new project
And
as well.
if I have a project, can I tell Graboo to look at my project and build me the Gradle file for it? Is that part of your ambition eventually?
So if you have an existing, what kind of project?
Oh, I don't know, say a Kotlin project, and I'm writing the Kotlin code, and I'm going, oh, I have to build this, and I need to include these things. Can you look at my code? And it's if that's not what you're planning, that's okay, because then I can go,
Yeah.
oh, I want to create a new one, and I want to start with this, and I'll add libraries as I need them.
Yeah.
That's okay too. But I'm just wondering what
Yeah, I'll have to
because
think
you
about that.
can do that with.
Yeah.
Well, with Rye, you can do it. I'm not sure about Cargo, but
Yeah, I mean, what's hard in the world of JVM stuff usually is that I guess you can run Kotlin C directly, but most people don't, and so you need a build tool of some sort to call the JVM class to do your build, and so.
I think I did use Kotlin C with the book.
Oh, you did?
For all
Wow.
the examples, other than
Yeah.
the Gradle file that you created for me, but that was for like when we package it up and people download it and run it, and then they can run that and it'll build everything.
Oh, yeah.
But you wrote that, and I still don't understand it fully. So
yeah. Okay, so there's the project initializer piece. Then one of the things that I've been experimenting with recently around Gradle is version catalogs, and there's some cool stuff in version catalog. So the idea of a version catalog is that you have a declarative TOML file that defines some dependencies. It doesn't define how those dependencies actually apply to the different like configurations of the build.
no, wait, where's the declarative TOML file? Where does that
You
come
put
from?
it in a Gradle directory usually.
Okay.
It's called libs.versions.toml or something
And it's
like
just
that.
the libraries that you need for your.
It's just the libraries that you need.
And
But what
Gradle and Graboo looks at this and generates
no,
based on that.
so Gradle will take this file
Ah,
and essentially compile it into code so that when you're in your build, you get these like type safe references. Man, I don't know if type safe is the right way to say it, but you get typed references that you can like dot complete through for your dependencies. So you say like libs.kotlinx.coroutines or whatever, and that'll reference this line in your TOML file, and it gives you one place to define all of your dependencies. And there's some good, because it's a declarative format, there's some good tooling around like dependabot and stuff to update your TOML file. So Gradle version catalogs, there's some cool stuff there, but one of the things that is kind of a challenge with version catalogs is that everyone ends up having their own libs.versions.toml file with pretty much the same things in it.
Hmm.
And so a few months ago, I was like, hey, I want to just create the kind of Uber list of all of the dependencies that you may need. And I'm sure I'm missing thousands or whatever, but kind of the common, like the same goal of Graboo, like let's get all the common ones into a file. And Gradle has a way to distribute that version catalog to other people. And so you can essentially reuse version catalogs across projects.
Hmm.
And so I created this thing called the Kotlin Universe Catalog. And the Kotlin
Not
Universe
an
Catalog,
ambitious name at all.
it's the universe of all Kotlin things. Yeah. Um, and so you can use that standalone, and I use it in a bunch of projects now just to be able to pull in an easy way to get a list of
So are they all
dependencies.
like mostly commented out and you just uncomment the ones you want, or how's that work?
It's kind of like you can think of it as a lookup. Like, so you've got your list of all possible dependencies,
Mm-hmm.
and in your build file, you go in and you put the actual dependency into your build file, but you do it through the generated accessor for the or lookup for the thing in the file
And the file has like version numbers and stuff
as
that you.
version numbers. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's two different universe catalogs. There's one called Stables. I think it's called Stables. Stables is all the current stable releases, and then there's Unstables, which is if there's anything with current new unstable releases, like
Mm.
Kotlin 2.0.0 beta 2 is in the Unstables
Mm.
catalog. So in your build file, you just say like universe.kotlin x.coroutines or whatever, and you don't have to define your own libs.versions.toml or whatever. Well, if you've used the Kotlin universe catalog outside of Graboo, then you do have to include the version catalog in your build. But in Graboo, I was like, maybe I should just include this universe catalog by default in a way that the user doesn't have to set it up or do anything. It just the universe catalog just comes in automatically, and so I think that creates in some places just a little bit less friction of like, okay, I don't have to go edit two files to get a dependency in. I can just use the universe catalog if it has what I need. But you're not constrained to only the universe catalog. Certainly, you can just put your own dependencies in
But
as you
most
want. But
people don't need to do that. And that little less friction, I just keep coming across how big, it seems like, oh, it's just a little thing, but it turns out to be sometimes a showstopper.
yeah,
Sometimes it makes you just not want to deal with it at all.
yeah. Yeah, so that's been a lot of the driver is like how can I take pieces of friction and reduce them,
Mm-hmm.
and so having that universe catalog just built in was one of the I think nice little friction reducers if people want to use it,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have to.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was that piece, and then I think that's most of what I have in Graboo today,
Mm-hmm.
um, and so there's I think the foundation is there for doing a bunch of things to reduce friction of using Gradle, not having the build get in your way, um, and there's a lot more to do on like that declarative developer model for the build, but there's a start to all that. Okay, so then there's some things that I will continue working on that I think is where we'll start to see kind of even more value of some of this stuff. So one of the things that we mentioned already is the two-way tooling. So being able to add dependencies in a variety of ways. So that's something that I want to work on to just make it easy to add dependencies into
That's
projects.
always been just like, yeah, that's so important to me. And that's, the thing that I probably use the most, other than, okay, getting the project started, is, oh, I have a new library. I add it. And both Cargo and Rye just do that seamlessly. And I've noticed, like, the guy who's been developing Rye, it's been at the current version for, I don't know, several months. For a while, he was changing it really fast.
Huh.
But, and it's not, there are features that I could imagine, oh, this would be nice, that or that's nice. But what's there right now does so much, of the stuff I don't want to think about for me, that like even if it didn't get any better than this, I would say, oh yeah, that's the one that I want to use, just because
Yeah.
it's so much, it has reduced so much of that friction. But one of the things that it does is there's a build command, and it'll turn something in, well, this is Python, so it'll turn it into what they call a wheel,
Uh-huh.
which is kind of the standard binary distribution format, if I'm got that right.
Okay.
Not fully, but I don't have to think about that. I can just
Yeah.
say build, and it creates a wheel, and that can go right up on PyPy or be
Yeah.
distributed, whatever. Do you have? Is that something that is part of the scheme for Graboo?
That's a good point. So the four archetypes that I've defined so far are Spring App, Kotlin App, Java App, and what's the fourth one? Android App.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the four archetypes that exist today. The next piece of the developer model that I want to define is the libraries. So we should be able to do Spring library probably doesn't make sense, but Java library, Kotlin library, Android library, and those there's today in Gradle, when you want to create and publish a library, there is a lot of build stuff to get right. And so I think the library side will be really interesting to really simplify that piece down, because just things like, oh, I want to I feel like when I have a library built with Gradle that I want to publish on Maven Central, I have to like say something for it to include the Java docs and the sources in the thing. Maybe I'm getting that wrong, but I feel like there's stuff like that where it's like, why do I need to tell it to do this thing that of course I want it to do?
Yep.
And so that'll be a place where, yeah, the Gradle boot developer model will just set all that stuff up for you. Ideally, if you've got a typical library, let's say Kotlin library that you want to put on Maven Central, your build file should be like 3 lines long, is what kind of thing I'm aiming for. So
there's another feature that actually not clear to me right now whether Rye does this, but um, um, Cargo does it, which is when it creates a new project, it can create like a kind of stub that shows you how to do testing. And
that's a good point. So
yeah.
one of the things that I did build into all four of the archetypes that exist today is testing, because that's just another place where typical Gradle, you have to define a whole bunch of build stuff to be able to just run tests. And it's like, okay, everyone should be running tests. Therefore, testing infrastructure in the build should be out of the box. And so that's one of the things that the Gradle developer model does, is it sets up testing for you for all the different project archetypes. And there's probably still some work to do around how I set that up, and making sure it works well for people. One example of this is that when I run my tests, I like to see all of the test output in the console. For some reason, sure there are reasons. For some reason, by default in Gradle, the test output like doesn't go to the console unless you do --info. It goes to a file, and I'm like, for me, maybe I'm weird, but for me, the default should be output it to the console. And so,
that's what I'm used to.
In Graboo, when you run Graboo test, you get your test output to the console. So,
does it also write it to the file?
I think it does.
Okay,
yeah.
So you get everything that you could imagine wanting.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
So yeah, I think that's one of those places where it's like, yeah, I should not have to put anything into my build to be able to run tests and see the output in the console.
Absolutely.
And so, for example, let's just take like the Spring app archetype in Graboo. It's like 2 lines, and you can run Graboo test and it will run your tests. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, there's no boilerplate for the things that are common.
Right.
Is
But even just having that, I feel like that's a lot of friction where you're going, oh, okay, let's see, I need to do testing. How do we set up tests again? And what do they look like? And all that. And to have that laid down there so you can go, oh, yeah, here's a test. I'll just make more like this. And I don't have to go, oh, how do I configure it to make the test? Because you're already like, you're focused on your code, and the tests are like an extra thing that you're already a little resistant to doing. And if it's got friction, then that's even less likely that you'll do it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I think that's super important,
Yeah. Yeah.
super valuable.
Yeah, and I don't know if I've done it yet. I may have, or probably will at some point. But there's this Gradle plugin called Kotlin Power Assert, which I
Mm.
love this tool. It's amazing, and I wrote a blog post that talked about this whole idea on my blog a few
Is it?
months ago.
And your
But
blog is jamesward.com or
yep,
something? Okay.
yeah. But this idea is that I've come to really dislike test DSLs,
Mm.
where you have to like have a whole different way of doing assertions. All these, and there's so many different assertion libraries out there, and all of my tests now are assert true.
And I'll bet they got that from PyTest,
Is
because that's the core of PyTest, is that you don't have a whole bunch of assert this, assert that, or whatever. You don't have all these functions. You just use the built-in assert,
yeah.
and it deals with it. And you're going, yeah, I don't
So
want to.
the reason why typically we haven't done this is that the output that you get when your assertion is false is true is not equal to false or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and that is not at all helpful. And so we first experienced this with Scala Zio and Zio Test.
Mm-hmm.
They have a macro that gives you this really nice output to give you this whole tree of your assertion, your Boolean assertion, so you can very quickly see like why were these things not equal. Um, and so there's I think it was after I wrote the blog post, someone had pointed out to me, oh, that exists in Kotlin
Power.
with this power assert.
Okay.
And so so I've now been using Kotlin power assert on everything, and it's fantastic because it gives you that view. You just do assert true, and you get that nice view of
Yeah. And
why
see,
the
if I was
assertion
teaching
was
a
false.
workshop on Kotlin, I would want that to be pre-configured so that if people had, test issues or whatever, it would give them, that would just shorten the time to
Yeah.
understanding, in my
So if I
opinion.
haven't done it yet, I will make Power Assert, the Kotlin Power Assert, a default in the Kotlin template, just
Yeah.
because it's one of those things where it's like, this is just the way that things should be, and we're going to make that the default instead of making people have to go
You're
through any
building
hoops.
the tool and you get to have your opinion.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people appreciate that opinion,
Yeah.
because a lot of people, they don't know. They go, well, what's this? What's built into the language? I'll use that. A lot of people default to
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
if you direct them to something that's way better,
Yeah.
I think they will appreciate that.
And if people don't like my choices, they can just use regular
Yeah.
Gradle. What I haven't explored too much yet is like what's the escape hatch look like? Like if you want to have your build kind of primarily in Graboo, but then be able to add other plugins or whatever, there's still some exploration to figure out like what that process would look like. Maybe it works today. I haven't even tried it, but yeah, because we're just on Gradle, just like essentially putting a new DSL into Gradle, it should be totally possible to do that alongside other Gradle modifications. But
Mm-hmm.
there's probably some exploration that's needed on what that escape hatch actually looks like in reality. And I think where what I haven't done yet is take any of my more complex builds and try to move them to Graboo and discover like, oh, do I need an escape hatch, or is this something that should actually just be in Graboo? And so that'll be part of this as I go further.
These are architecture design decisions.
Yeah.
So as long as we're on the subject of opinions, um, I think this is outside of your purview, but I'm just going to ask anyway, because when I've had to explain the JVM logging system, it's like, oh, there's all these abstractions and abstractions on top of abstractions, and now it's like, oh, well, just make choices, and it's like, I don't know what choices to make. It's like
Yeah.
which logging pile of logging framework should I use?
Yeah.
And is that a I mean, I suppose that would be much further on if you decided to add, if you say, okay, add logging, and then you would have your opinionated choices about what the logging should be. But at least it would be something there, and most people would use it.
Yeah.
And then if they needed, to tweak it for some random, for tuning or whatever, then they can go in and learn about it. But they
Yeah.
don't have to know everything just to get it working.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't thought fully about logging in particular, but as an example of this, one of the things that I'll have in Graboo add is the ability to add, let's say, Ktor client, so the Kotlin HTTP client library. Well, it turns out on the JVM, Ktor client, I think, needs SLF for J, the logging library,
Really?
or needs a logging. I don't know. I'll have
Mm-hmm.
to dive deeper into this.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's something that people commonly do is to put SLF for J alongside Ktor client for the JVM, then Graboo is going to do that for you.
Mm.
It's not going to make you have to make that decision
Nice.
if there's a sensible default. And I think
Yeah.
in that particular case, there is a good sensible default, which is just include it. And you know what? If somebody wants to remove it, then maybe we can figure out
Sure,
a
they
way
can always
to
go
override it.
in, but I think the hurdle that I've always had is just, oh, what do I do here and how do I do it? And it's like supposed to be, it's so much of a sensible default that if you're reading an article, they just go, oh yeah, add this to your Gradle build file. I don't remember how to do that.
Yeah, and where does it
I,
even go?
yeah, I don't know where it goes or how to,
Yeah.
and so if you create the sensible default for me, I mean, I may never touch it.
Yeah.
And I'll bet most people will never touch it. They'll just go, I'm trying to write this program. Do the rest of it for
Can
me.
we make the build go away,
Make the
essentially?
build go away. Oh, there's your tagline.
There's our tagline.
Yes, make the build go away.
For most people.
For
we'll
most people.
Put that in like fine print.
For most people, right. Well, and I feel like even if somebody is a build expert, there's all this stuff that they don't want to have to write the starting thing from hand. They want to tune it.
Yeah.
I feel like the work that you're doing to get rid of the fiddly bits is going to be appreciated by so many people.
Yeah.
I think this is your best project ever.
Oh, thank you.
I think so.
Okay,
Really.
there's a couple other things that I want to talk about, because a part of this, doing the podcast around this, is that a while back, this was maybe a year ago, I tweeted something about how I wanted to fix the friction with Gradle, and I'd asked, like, does anyone want to help me with this? And there was a number of people that did say that they would be interested in helping me. And so part of why I want to share this in the podcast is to say, okay, I'm now ready for help, because there's a few other pieces that I want to tackle that will take some work. And so some of those pieces that we've talked about, the dependency adding thing. So that's the two-way tooling is one of the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Another one that I really want to build, which I have not seen in the world of Gradle, maybe exists and somebody can tell me and I can just reuse it, is something that's a Gradle console. So this is something I actually really like about SBT. Is in SBT, you run SBT, you get thrown into the SBT interactive console, and now you can like tab complete all sorts of the tasks. You can tab complete the properties of the build. There's all these things that you can do in this really nice experience when you're in the shell of the build.
Right.
And so I really want to have, as part of Graboo, this Gradle shell or Gradle console, Gradle shell, I don't know what we should call it. But so that's one of the pieces that I want to build with Graboo. And I think that will be a good way for people that want to be want to have just an easier, like, how do you know what task to even run on a Gradle build? Like, you maybe have read documentation, but sometimes the tasks, well, very often in Gradle, the tasks are actually based on names that are defined in your build file. And so your task name can be different depending on what you've defined. And
Mm.
so tab completion for tasks sure would be nice. And
Yeah.
so
What are my options?
what are my options?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um,
And so you could use help with that. And also, I would think that one of the benefits of working on this is if you're interested in learning about Kotlin Native, this would be a really good way to
Yeah, that
show your
will.
chops.
So that particular piece would be on the JVM because we need to actually
Okay.
be running Gradle.
You're already running
We're
the
we're
JVM at
running.
this point.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
exactly. So that one wouldn't be
So
in the
maybe
world of
there's
Kotlin
maybe
Native,
the
but
Kotlin native part is mostly done at this point.
there's a few little tasks left
Okay.
that I could probably use some help with. Like I have an auto updater.
Mm.
Right now it just checks every time. I need to like do like throttling so it only checks once an hour or
Hmm.
most or something. I don't know. So there's a few little pieces left in the native bootstrapper, but
Okay, but
that
that's mostly
one's
done.
that's
Okay,
mostly
so
done.
most of
So
this would be JVM work.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah,
so and lots of people would
yeah,
already know how to do that
yeah. It
and
should be pretty straightforward.
should, you know.
Okay, and then the next piece that I'm interested in exploring and looking at is one of the frictions that I have with Gradle. And again, this I think this comes from my experience with SBT is that you don't always have multiple main files in a project, but
Mm-hmm.
when you do, well, if you have one or you have more, it sure would be nice to have a nice experience about interacting with those main files. And in SBT, if you say SBT run, if you have one main, it just runs it. You don't have to specify it. It
Uh,
figures it out. Like,
okay.
oh, you've got
Oh,
a main,
there's
let's
only
run it.
one. I'll run that.
Yeah.
That's what you meant.
And if you have multiple, then it asks you which
Oh,
one do you want to run. I'm like,
that's
the,
reasonable.
and you don't have to like do any build mucking to
Uh-huh.
do that. It's just is
Right.
built in. And so one of the other things that I think would be a nice piece to Graboo is that like kind of auto main discovery and giving you a nice experience around it.
Mm.
If you look at my current archetypes that you get through creating a new Graboo app, you'll see that the main class is specified, and that's just because I don't have this auto main discovery piece in there yet.
Oh, I
But
see.
that would be I could reduce my build files from 4 lines to 3 lines if I get the auto main discovery piece built. So
Mm,
that would be
nice.
nice. Yeah.
So that's one of your ambitions.
Yep. Yeah. And so that's what's kind of currently on tap, and things I'll continue working on around Graboo. It's on my GitHub,
Hmm.
GitHub James Ward, and then Graboo.
Right. And
And
then what now does Graboo.dev have a link to the GitHub as well?
it doesn't, but I should put that on there.
Okay.
So yep, good idea.
Hmm.
Um, the that we can talk for a minute about the graboo.dev because
Okay.
there was some we last night were working together on some of the fun parts of that particular piece, which is um, graboo.dev. It's running on Google Cloud Run, which is serverless, takes containers, and I could have done the JVM based server and probably would have been a lot easier, but I wanted instant startup. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do a Kotlin native server using Ktor.
Hmm.
And this, runs natively. So my container image is super small. It starts up instantly, all that. But there were some challenges because it turns out that I'm using the Ktor client on curl on the native system. And then you have to get a native you have to get a container image that has the curl libraries in it, and so there was some fun bits to
A
getting
Docker
that
container image.
Docker container.
Hmm.
So getting all of that kind of machinery set
Right,
up and
because the
working was
Docker
a little tricky,
container
but
you were using didn't come with curl.
yeah, I was
Okay.
using Debian Slim. Debian Slim didn't have, well, it didn't have zip, which I needed, and I didn't have lib curl,
And why did
whatever,
you choose Debian Slim?
because it's nice and slim. I
Okay,
don't
because of the name. All right.
know.
And you're looking for quick startup.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Small container
uh-huh.
image, instant startup. Some people use Alpine, but getting Kotlin native to work on Alpine is a little bit tricky. And
Mm,
I was worried about getting the zip and curl kind of, I don't know,
right.
just so going with a Debian based image was a better setup for Kotlin native. Um, yeah. So that was,
Yeah, it seems like you're dealing with so many practical issues here that we are able to, well, on this podcast, we sort of deal with, what would be all the interesting ideal things, and then here you're down mucking around with, oh yeah,
How do we make this practically work?
yeah, practically, where here are my constraints and parameters, and that forces me to use this thing, which has these limitations, and
Yeah.
I have to, yeah, actually piecing together a real project is, we haven't achieved nirvana
Yeah.
yet with
Well,
that.
one of the things I've realized in this whole adventure of Graboo is that I complain a lot about developer experience and how often the developer experience is bad.
Hmm.
And working on this project, I realized just how hard it is to create good developer experience.
Hmm.
I think it's one of those things where if it was easy, everyone would do it. And it turns out that often I think good developer experience actually takes a lot of work and is really hard. And so it's been a fun adventure.
Yeah, yeah. You have to commit to it. It's not, because I think what has happened in the past is it's like, oh well, I'm committed to developing this programming language, and these other things. I mean, there's tools for that. That's not my interest or focus or whatever. And somebody like what you're doing here, you have to go, no, this is important, and I'm just gonna really drill into this thing
Yeah.
and do whatever it takes.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be a lot of. I mean, I'm already going. Oh, I don't. Just the idea that if I were to do another edition of the Kotlin book, that I wouldn't have to worry about screwing around with Gradle stuff.
Yeah.
That's just a mental relief.
Yeah.
And for beginners, my gosh, I mean, that made the Rust experience so great, because I'm
Mm,
going, oh, I want to create example. Cargo knew this.
yeah.
And it's just like, cargo run
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this just, now I can focus on the the rust and not all of the messing around without it. And
Yeah.
I mean, Go has its issues, but I'm glad that they did as much as they did for, taking those decisions off the table, and we'll just do it for you. And this is,
Go brings up a good question of I haven't yet put a formatter into Graboo, but that's one of the, like Go format and Cargo has a built-in
yes,
formatter, right? And
yes,
so it probably would make sense. Like, hey, most people should probably be formatting their code with a standard formatter and standard
mm-hmm.
rules, and so maybe we should include KT format or one of the Kotlin, or I
Sure.
guess that would be in the
And
Kotlin archetype, but
you'll have it in the place where if somebody wants to change it, they go, oh, I'll change this to something else, rather than going, how do I put a formatter
yeah.
in? There's another thing which I think I asked for with Rye, which is like, once I know more about my style, that I can replace the default generated stuff with, oh well, I'm always going to be using this library, or I'm always going to be
Mm.
configuring for this line width or something like that. So when you generate my file, um, put those things in. So
Ooh,
be
I
able
like
to
that.
go back to some kind of okay, here's what we're using as a default, and if you want to modify that, go
Yeah.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a
So
good idea. Yeah, that would be, I don't think that would be too
I
bad
don't think it'd be very
to
hard,
yeah.
because you have some place where you go, oh well, this
Yeah.
is what we're going to use to spit this stuff out.
Yeah.
So
And the templater that creates the new projects is pretty basic right now.
hmm
It will need some work. I had written a templater for Zio. A couple of years ago, I created this like start.zio.dev or whatever. You
hmm
could bootstrap new Zio projects, and I haven't worked on it in a long time.
right.
It doesn't even work anymore. But the architecture that I went with for the Zio project initializer was all based on diffs, and so it actually created a really interesting way to like stack changes. So it's like, okay, you've got your base project, but what if you want Scala 3 instead of Scala 2? Well, that's just a diff. What if you want this
Oh.
dependency instead of this one? That's just a diff. And
hmm
so I was able to create this like um, diff structure where depending on what options you specified, it would apply this set of diffs together. And I maybe was even doing some like matrix testing to like make sure that all the different variations would actually work in the right way across the diffs and stuff. So it was a little bit tricky, but it was an interesting architecture. So back to your point is maybe you could write a patch file to your .graboo directory, and that patch file would get applied on Graboo new for you or something. So yeah, something like that would be interesting.
And you said you wrote your own templating system.
Oh, it's just Kotlin multi-line strings. Like
Okay.
it's very
Because I know
basic, but
sometimes projects will use a templater that somebody else has built so that they don't have to reinvent that whole thing. I don't know if that would make sense.
It could, yeah. I've not put much thought
right
into
now
the
the
actual
Kotlin
templater
string
piece yet.
substitution is just fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
But I think you're probably right. At some point, I will need some kind of actual templating library or a patch diff based system or something. But yeah, I haven't put much thought into that piece yet.
Oh. Yeah. So let's see. Have we covered the bases?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully, people try it out, but it's very early.
Sure.
And please let me know feedback, thoughts, and if you want to help, there's still a lot to do. So
sure. So it can be a
fun
I would
project.
think you've run open source projects before where people are contributing, so you know how to make that a good experience.
Collaborate with others.
Nice. Yeah, plays well with others.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah,
I would think so. Well,
so it should be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll probably up at the Winter Tech Forum in a couple months be exploring this.
Oh yeah, you could even have that as a hack day project.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's and then show people how it works and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that sounds great. I mean, this warms my heart.
Yeah.
Because reducing friction,
make the build go away.
Yeah, and I mean, even being able to ask ChatGPT to create a build file for me, I think I still would like. I mean, that's helpful, but then when I want to add a new library or whatever, being able to say Graboo add, that's just wired into my, from using these other tools. That's what I want, and so having that available, I think, it's just going to make life a lot easier for lots of people, and especially new learners.
Yeah,
because there's so many hurdles to just getting Java to work, or
exactly.
Kotlin or whatever. It's like take those off my plate.
That's it.
Yeah,
that's the goal.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that.
Thanks for your help. It's been been noodling this and working on it together for a long time. So
all right, and we will see everybody or hear everybody in
the
next
new year. Yeah, see you in 2024.
Hey.